You know what, I'm so used to holding the a7S3 and the a7 IV now. It's kind of weird going back to this with this little tilt screen, and you know, this thing's been with me 3-4 years. It's made me a lot of money and it's literally been everywhere with me. Hi, my name is Chris, welcome back to the channel. This is Bucky the Cat, and today we're talking about whether you should buy the a7 III in 2022. When the Sony a7 III came out back in, I think it was 2018, this camera made waves in the photo and video world. It's the first Sony camera that people really took seriously and made photo and video shooters want to switch over to Sony. And a lot of them actually did. But with all the new cameras released in the past 4 years, is this camera really still worth it? So let's start with the obvious one. The a7 III had the absolute best autofocus when it came out. It was reliable, it was quick, it was accurate, and in my opinion it still holds up to this day. What you're getting in newer cameras is the advantage of things like autofocus tracking in video. You've got finer control over the speed and sensitivity. I personally loved how reliable this autofocus was, and I never had any complaints. I honestly think for both photo and video it still holds its own. If you look at what Panasonic are doing with their temperamental DFD autofocus, and Fuji is kind of almost there, but Sony and Canon really managed to nail it a long time ago. I do love the autofocus tracking in video though, particularly for video use where touching the screen all the time isn't really an option. I just don't think I could go back to touching the screen every time I want to change the focus point now. So I work in a lot of weddings or mid-sized corporate jobs, and I see so many photographers still using the a7 III for these jobs. I think 24 megapixels is definitely the sweet spot between having enough detail, but also you don't end up with those stupidly big files. Again, this is an area where the a7 III is still really strong. The images are sharp and can be blown up, cropped, and all the rest of it. The tilt screen, in my opinion, is better for photography. I can't really explain why, but I feel like it might be something to do with the time taken to flip out the flippy screen. And this might be why the A1 still has the tilt screen too. Obviously, if you want to print your image huge, or if you're doing something like landscapes or something that involves a lot of information, there are higher megapixel Sony cameras out there, looking at the Sony a7iii series. And for those looking for a faster, more versatile camera for sports photography, there's cameras like the A9 and the A1. But I think this hits the perfect middle ground, and I can see a lot of photographers still using this for years to come. So when the a7 III came out, it had some of the best video quality in a mirrorless camera. I think if I'm right, the HD was actually softer than the a7S II, but the a7 III's 4K was downsampled from 6K, which made for an incredibly sharp image, which I loved. Again, I think the 4K on the a7 III might actually be sharper than the 4K on the a7S III, the newer camera, but this is just judging from a few videos I've seen on YouTube, and I haven't done these tests myself. In 2022, I still think the 4K quality on the a7 III is really good in good light, and actually in bad light as well. That brings me to the low light performance. The a7 III has great low light performance, and I'd be confident whacking it up to like 10,000 ISO, and I have done that, sometimes more, and you still get a really super clean image. And I know what some of you lot are thinking, who needs to shoot 10,000 ISO? Do you even light your shots, bro? Yes, I do, but I film weddings and my clients don't like lights. So I tell the story with other means. But, and the size of this but depends on how much it matters to you. The a7 III obviously does lack that 10-bit 422 codec that the newer Sony cameras have, which means you just don't get that color depth, and it's much less advised to shoot in log. Now, I've seen a lot of videographers, particularly wedding videographers, say they don't want or need 10-bit and they're happy with their colors. Fair play. But for me, I absolutely love filming in the 10-bit log on the a7S III and just having so much information and colour to play with and grade without my image completely falling apart. It's like going from editing a JPEG to editing a RAW, although obviously it's not RAW, but you get me. You also miss out on 4K at 50, 60 and 100 frames per second, as you're limited to that 25 frames per second on the a7 III. Again, not a deal breaker if you're happy to shoot HD, but again, now I shoot everything in 4K, I've kind of noticed a huge difference in the final output of my work, and my clients have started making comments about how crisp everything looks. Obviously lighting matters, but 4K is the real deal on these cameras. One quick mention also for the image stabilization, the a7 III obviously has IBIS, but the newer cameras like the a7 IV and the a7S III have that new active stabilization, which crops in about 1.1 times, but it's actually a lot better than a7 III and makes it suitable for a bit more handheld use, especially for video. And the final thing I have to say really about video is that 30-minute record limit. It's a bit of a bummer. If you're looking for a way to get around that 30-minute record limit, by the way, I have a video which I'll link up here and down here. This has been a big stress point for me at weddings and events, and luckily the whole 30-minute record limit just doesn't exist on some of the newer cameras. So that is definitely the benefit of buying a newer camera over the a7S III. So I've put the menu system under additional things because I believe that if you spend enough time with the old Sony menus, you'll get used to it. And yeah, everything is in the wrong place and it's a nightmare to navigate at first, but everything sort of becomes muscle memory of any menu system if you spend enough time with it. So I'm not rating a camera based on that personally, but you get it, it's not the best menu system. So it's absolutely no question in my mind that the a7S III and the a7 IV feel more comfortable to hold than the older generation of cameras like the a7 III. But if you're happy with the a7 III, then it's really no problem. It's a little more compact because the grip's a little shorter, and it's really not that bad either. And then of course there's the flippy screens on the new cameras. If you're filming yourself at all, a flippy screen just makes it infinitely easier. No monitor required, you can check your framing and exposure, and you can get going pretty easily. If you're doing a lot of filming yourself, then every other camera at the moment offers a flip screen, and I honestly don't think the a7 III is the way to go. So on to price now, and the Sony a7 III can be picked up for about 1,600 quid new, or if you want to get one used, you can get it for about 1,200, and I'm assuming that's roughly the same in dollars. I will say straight off the bat though, there's nothing recent on the full frame market that's competing in this price bracket. I'm mainly talking about Sony cameras of course, but I'm pretty sure it's the same across the board. If you can live with a smaller viewfinder and lack of dials, then the a7C might be a good choice, but more on that in the verdict. You have some really competitive options in the Fuji market as long as you're willing to go APS-C of course, and if I'm quite honest, I was so close to ditching my a7 III once I tried out the X-T4. Canon have the EOS R still in that realm, but it wasn't the best camera when it was released, and that 4K 25 frames per second is looking more dated in 2022. So the answer to that question in the title is complicated, and what follows is my opinion, so make an educated decision by watching a few videos, but here's my 2 cents. For more or less all hobbyist photographers, this camera does everything you need it to do. Get an a7 III used and invest in some good lenses. For low to mid-range photographers filming small businesses and weddings, again, this little camera will get you far. It still has great photo quality in a range of lighting scenarios, and the autofocus is more than good enough. This is a moneymaker. For those looking for something more specialised though, with a high megapixel count for landscapes, or fast shooting for like sports photographers or bird photographers, there are better options in the A9 or A7R range. So for videographers, it's really hard for me to sit here and tell you what you need. But look, the a7 III is a fantastic camera with amazing autofocus, great image quality, and it still stands today in 2022. But I think if you're already earning money from videography, then a better investment would be to save for an a7 IV. For me, it was the upgrade from 8-bit to 10-bit was like the upgrade from HD to 4K or black and white to colour. Alright, that's a bit dramatic, but you get the point. So if you're just starting out and want to get into the Sony ecosystem, then the a7 III is a solid choice, and it will leave you room to buy a nice lens or two. If you want something more modern, you can go with the a7C, but it does lack the dials of the a7 III, which makes it harder to change settings on the fly. And it's also got a smaller viewfinder if you use it often, which I actually do. If you're making money from videography though, I fully recommend saving those pennies, carry on grinding and get an a7 IV. It's such an amazing camera. And talking about the a7 IV, I'll be making a couple of videos on this camera coming soon, so if you're into that, hit the subscribe button. So that's been it from me. If you've got this far, you really are a trooper. Give yourself a pat on the back in the comments section for being one of the few humans left with an attention span. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful at all, then hit the like button. And if you have any questions about any of these cameras, then put them down below in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.